Hey everyone, if you can believe it, we are in week 10. So let's take a look at what AET has in store. Look at that, it's Christmas morning again. We are doing lighting in the next 2 weeks. So um, the first week, so week 10, we're going to go over lighting basics. So make sure you read over this. This will really help you for this week's lab and, of course, for the quiz this week. Um, some basic terminology, really important to understand the difference between a lamp, a fixture, a lumen, illumination, foot candle. They're pretty straightforward. I'm going to go over this really quickly just to help. A lamp is any piece of technology that generates light. So basically, what you would normally think of as a light bulb, lighting designers and lighting folks call a lamp. Okay. Fixture should be something you're familiar with. A lighting fixture contains one or more lamps. So technically, when you have what you would normally call a lamp, like a table lamp or a floor lamp, that's actually technically a fixture because it contains a lamp, right? So the what you would normally call the bulb is the lamp, and then the thing that's holding it and has all the electronics and so forth. The more technical term is luminaire, and so either of them is fine. They're used interchangeably, but you should know that luminaire, same thing as the fixture. A lumen is the basic output of light. Um, and so light lamps, you can look up the specs and to tell you how many lumens that they provide. That is the number. That's how much light it produces. Now, that doesn't mean it's how bright it's going to make things. There are a lot of other factors. Lighting is actually incredibly complex, and there's so many different types of lights and color temperatures, fixtures, lamps. I mean, it's really something. Um, anyway, there's a lumen rating. Okay. Illumination. This is really important. This is one of the really important metrics that we use for lighting design. And so illumination is brightness, basically. So it is how bright a surface is. And there's two ways to express that. There's the lux, which is 1 lumen per square meter. Okay, so that's basically your metric version. The English version, which is what we use, is foot candle, which is so a lux is 1 lumen per square meter. A foot candle is 1 lumen per square foot. Foot candles, excuse me, are really common. That's how you determine is the surface bright enough. And we have a really cool piece of equipment called a light meter that we will use in lab this week that tells you how bright the surface is, at any point. So very important because there are codes and there are standards um, for how much illumination is in a room. And so, a hospital operating room, a facility where you're working on really tiny mechanical parts. Those are applications where you need a whole lot of illumination. So many um, foot candles. Um, you're probably looking at like 200 to 250 up to even 1,000 foot candles. And then something like a lab space or a classroom, an office, you're probably looking closer to 40, 50, maybe as low as 30 foot candles. But then a hallway and a parking lot, you can have down to around 20. A bathroom, like it just depends on the application. So, but foot candle is something you use a lot in lighting design, and we'll go over them this week. And then, as I said, you use a light meter. That's this piece of equipment that will measure brightness. Okay, so that's a little bit of an overview. And so there's some readings here which are really, really helpful. This is good. It helps you, um, it sort of explains how to use the light meter. It's of course your usual Ed puzzles, PowerPoint posts. I want you to look through these passive solar design principles. So again, this course is largely about sustainable design. And so lighting is a big one. And this is an extension of some concepts you learned earlier with passive solar. But there are some strategies in terms of Shading devices, that are fixed on the outside of a building. This should be a really of great interest to the architectural engineering folks in the room. So you have these shading features on the outside of buildings, and we'll look at some examples this week. But do you want them to be vertical? Do you want them to be horizontal? How do you determine that? A lot of sustainable buildings, like LEED buildings and living buildings and so forth, they'll have those external shade features. But we'll look at kind of continue a little bit of that discussion on passive solar design with the overhangs and the shading and all that. Um, and then we'll make some considerations about solar angle, which is really important, something called altitude, sometimes called elevation. And any good designer, architects included, should evaluate the natural light that's available. Um, and so we're going to go over these things called sun path charts, which you'll use a little bit in class. And this it's pretty cool because the sun is very consistent. I mean, of course, you have clouds, but where the sun is located in the sky, I mean, you can predict that down to the foot if you know where you are. So we'll look at some pretty cool apps that show you how to evaluate that, and then you're going to use that information as a consideration in passive lighting design. All right, so that's it for this week. Next week, you will get more into the calculation side of things, in particular with regards to something called the lumen method, which is a lighting, a really commonly used lighting design. Um, I mean, it's a formula, but there's a lot that goes into that formula. Anyway, that's next week. So for this week, you'll have a really good sense of what lighting is and what goes into some basic lighting design. And then we'll do a lab this week where you're going to measure the illumination in the lab and see if it's properly lit, see if you can make some suggestions. Sorry, the classroom, make some suggestions of how to use passive design features. Oh, the one other thing I did want to point out, really, really important that you look in this Lab 8 folder, which is this week's lab, and watch this Lab 8 tutorial. And I suggest looking over Lab 8. So this tutorial is really, really helpful in terms of the lab. So make sure you watch it. It really walks you step by step. So just make sure you watch it before lab this week. Okay, very important. Make sure you get that done. Okay, and then that will make Lab 8 go much more smoothly. You feel a lot more comfortable with it, and you can even get a little bit. Let me think. Yeah, actually, take that back. You can't really get a head start because you need to be in lab making light measurements, but it will give you a really good sense of what you're getting into in the lab. Okay. All right. Well, enjoy the content this week, and I'll see you later this week in lab.